hopefully not mold.
Right.
Hopefully you caught it quick enough. But
Yeah.
if you get condensation in it, beyond the fact that it might have been warm, is that then you need to dry it more. So there is a saving grace there, a little like the jams and jellies were, but not like tomatoes and peaches were today, that you can go back and dry it more.
Right.
So that's always a helpful idea. And in Indiana, with the humidity the way it is, there are sometimes you just have to go back in and re-dry everything because they've absorbed moisture just from being in the kitchen.
So that's a pretty important step, being sure that you put your dried fruit or your fruit leather into a sealed bag, so you know, especially at the time of our harvest is often when we have the most humidity here in Bloomington. So pretty important step there.
And and sometimes people will call me and ask about dehydrating bananas because they like banana chips that we buy at the store, or the apple chips that we buy at the store. And I have to let them in on a commercial secret. It is that the deep fat fried first, and then they're dried.
Deep fried bananas?
They deep fry the bananas so that they don't turn brown, and then they dry them. And so if you look at the label, back to that issue of label reading, that you'll find there's quite a bit of fat in apple chips and banana chips commercially made because they have been deep fat fried first to keep their color. And then quite often sugar's added to them to make them still taste like bananas and apples. And then, of course, we want cinnamon on them and we want flavorings on them and so on. So if you're drying bananas at home, you're going to find you're going to get a rather not very pretty looking banana simply because you aren't doing all those steps ahead of it. The one thing you might do is put the fruit fresh, like we talked about with peaches, the ascorbic acid, and dusting them in that first, or dusting them in that with some powdered sugar.
Okay.
So again, you're closing off the oxygen to the banana piece. And when bananas are very, very expensive, you don't want to waste any of them.
Right.
And so that to get a dried banana at home, you do need to do more than just slice them and put them in the dehydrator, which people forget. The same thing with apples. Anything that would turn dark.
Right.
Apples, peaches, pears, that kind of thing. But things like peppers and onions and that kind of thing are so simple. You cut them up and in they go. Turn it on. Leave it on all night. And you're done.
It's a good idea, I think, when you're preserving food yourself and when you're embarking upon this lifestyle where you're trying to do these things that not a lot of people are doing at home by themselves, to really not expect to have your fruit leather taste exactly like the fruit leather that you get at the store, and learning to cultivate different tastes. So even if right off the bat you're like, wait, this doesn't taste like what I'm used to, but to allow the natural flavors to come through.
And the same thing like with apple leather, and applesauce. Homemade applesauce is never going to be white because we don't have the machinery to keep the oxygen away from the apples when they're cooking down. The same thing when they dry in the dryer, that you're going to have brown, dark brown apple leather because of the oxygen air circulation of the dehydrator.
Right.
And it's just naturally going to turn dark.
Yeah.
And where if you're buying them at the store, there's a lot of preservatives in them. And they've had the commercial accessibility of these huge, 500-gallon kinds of things that have these water jackets around them and, vacuumed and all that kind of thing so that, they do stay white. And so, like you say, you've got to get used to the fact that it's not always going to be like the store, but it's going to have the natural flavor rather than the commercial flavor that some people are used to.
Right, and oftentimes, we don't think about the processes that make our foods look the way that they look. And we're getting generally, I would say, a healthier product when we in our communities engage in really preserving foods in these traditional methods, but with the new slants on them. So I wanted to tell everyone a little bit about meat jerky. Especially we have, hunters and local meat in this area. And as someone who doesn't eat a lot of meat, it's relatively new to me, but talk about a great backpacking snack if you need high protein. So a couple of important things are to preheat the meat strips and marinate them to 160 degrees prior to placing them in the dehydrator. So that's a really important one when you're talking about food safety. And if the meat was not dried for some reason, you weren't thinking, you didn't go through the process, you'll want to heat it for 10 minutes in an oven preheated to 275 degrees, just to be safe.
Right.
So,
because a lot of times when the beef jerky that we have here that has been made was actually then stored in the freezer, just to be on the double safe side. But with beef jerky, there are a lot of people who love to make their own beef jerky, and this one is one that's still bendable, so that's okay. And then the other part of it is that the marinade has to be used and then refrigerated if you're going to do more than one batch of jerky, simply because the marinade has some of the raw juices in it. And so, like it is with anything, if you've marinated chicken to put on the grill, and then think you're going to take the marinade and pour it over the chicken afterwards and then eat it, you're asking for cross-contamination and that bacterial buildup. And so that's one of the things that a lot of our hunters and people who do a lot of beef jerky production have to be reminded to refrigerate the marinade, because the marinade is expensive to put together.
Right.
Because there's special, everybody has their own special secret recipe of what their marinade is, because they've developed one that they happen to like.
Yeah.
And I have nephews who are hunters, and so I'm always nagging them, get that marinade back in the refrigerator. Don't leave it out with the dryer, because they do make a lot of venison jerky, and they've actually been out west and gotten some unique ones. And then my nephew was up in Alaska and actually made salmon jerky. Wow. And I thought, why waste salmon that way? I like to eat it fresh. But you can, any protein, meat protein, poultry, fish, you can make jerky out of. And so, in countries where there isn't refrigeration, or like you mentioned, backpacking, the jerky is great because you've got good quality protein. Usually there's a little bit of sugar in it to give you some extra energy there in the marinade. And so that the jerky can be one that is easy to carry around. And, for some people, that's their treat. The beef sticks and all of that kind of thing. And it's a great way to use some of the wild meats that otherwise wouldn't get necessarily used, because people aren't familiar with the wildness of venison and rabbit and things like that.
The different flavors.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to do, but it's one that probably is the most dangerous as far as food safety goes.
Well, that's what I would really want to point out with, if